to agree to a Gaza ceasefire or recognise a Palestinian state, calling it a distorted campaign. Saar told reporters that ending the conflict while Hamas still holds hostages and controls Gaza would be a tragedy, and declared it ain't going to happen no matter how much pressure is put on Israel. His remarks come as a UN-backed food security monitor, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, warns the worst-case scenario of famine is now unfolding in Gaza. The IPC says Gaza's population faces acute malnutrition, disease and rising hunger-related deaths, adding that airdrops alone are insufficient and full, unimpeded humanitarian access is urgently needed. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called the destruction in Gaza intolerable, while top UN humanitarian officials warned the next few days are critical to scaling up aid. Israel and Hamas continue to blame each other, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists there's no starvation and no policy of starvation in Gaza. The IPC has not yet formally declared famine, but says it will conduct a full review without delay. Well, joining us to discuss these latest developments from Gaza, Peter Baum, the foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz, who joins us live from London. Peter, as always, a pleasure to have you on the programme. Let's first look at these comments from Israel relating to a ceasefire and pressure on a ceasefire and potentially a two-state solution. Is this level of response expected, given the fact that hostages are still being held and Hamas are still operating within the Gaza enclave?
Yes, good afternoon, Joshua. Very nice to be with you again. Indeed, I think the comments from the Israeli Foreign Minister are pretty predictable, as was the pressure mounting on Israel by various countries and the United Nations. It's absolutely clear, this is a certainty, that the idea of a two-state solution was being proposed currently is dead in the water. It ain't going to happen, as the Foreign Minister said, whilst the conflict is ongoing, whilst the hostages are still being held in captive, and whilst Hamas is still the main influencer in the Gaza Strip. So the political pressure on Israel will certainly mount. I believe our own UK government is meeting today to discuss whether the UK should recognise a Palestinian state. But in reality, this will not be legally binding, legally confirmed, until various other factors come into play. And that is, of course, end of hostilities, release of the hostages, and Hamas being completely eliminated from a position of power and influence within the Gaza Strip.
Yes, Peter, let's now shift our attention to some comments that have been made about the current situation in Gaza relating to the humanitarian crisis that's being reported, with the UN Secretary-General commenting, but also other groups as well, talking about the potential famine that could be at play soon, stating that this is a critical time and questioning the airdrops, which we know can be dangerous, also have limited impact given the amount of aid that can be loaded on these aircraft. There is a question to be had, and I want to pose that question to you, with, of course, Hamas being weakened, not just within Gaza itself, but also with the weakening of Iran. Is there a point that humanity should take priority over military action?
I believe there is, Joshua, and this latest episode, these last couple of months, have been an absolute public relations disaster for Israel and her supporters. But let's just be factual for a moment. There is no famine in Gaza. What there is a high risk of famine and high levels of food insecurity. If we look around the globe, Joshua, Sudan is currently the only country in the world experiencing famine, and those other geographical areas who are on the same level as Gaza, i.e. a risk of famine and higher levels of food insecurity, are numerous. There's South Sudan, there's Haiti, there's Mali, there's Burkina Faso, Chad, the Democratic Congolese Republic, numerous other geographical areas are in the same on the same level of risk of famine and food insecurity, and yet it's only Gaza that is gaining the world's attention in what has been, as I said, an absolute public relations disaster. Now, from what
Peter,
I gather,
sorry to interject. I'm really sorry for interrupting. I do just want to pick up on your point. You did list those countries, but of course Israel have forced an aid blockade for a long period of time. So you could argue that those countries, yes, facing a similar situation. But I think some of the comments that have been had and the UN talking about this being a man-made situation and forced upon the people of Gaza by the Israeli blockades that have been in place. So there is a slight difference there. Can I grab your response to that?
Yeah, indeed. Well, don't forget the blockade as such was some kind of disastrous blockade because the Hamas were able to create an underground city as big as the London Underground. Think of all the heavy equipment needed to create those thousands of meters of tunnels underground, all the food that was coming in, all the supplies and weapons were coming in. If there was indeed a blockade on Gaza, it wasn't a very effective blockade, as is factually proven by the underground city created for decades, must have been years in making, by Hamas. So I don't think that the blockade has anything to do with it. There is a crossing with Egypt in Rafah. Egypt has built thousands of meters of wall, which is a blockade, in fact. So why isn't the world's attention focused on the Egyptian blockade, which has a border with Gaza? No, this is completely as a result of Hamas and their attempts to destabilize the region by attacking Israel. It's not that the Israelis thought that the risk of famine has occurred. I put that one fairly on the shoulders of the Hamas leadership.
Yes, absolutely, Peter. And supporting that, of course, the Israeli government have said that the reason that there have been restrictions is because of the aid falling into the hands of Hamas and reports of that aid being sold at an extortionate price, limiting the amount of aid that people in Gaza can get. That, the Israeli narrative. Of course, the UN with their own opinions on the situation and other NGOs, over 100, talking about the situation. It's a divisive topic. Peter, thank you ever so much for your insight. We will hear